This is the last lecture, and I'm way behind. Subculture of violence. Researchers have discovered that certain types of people have gravitated to areas of the country where they could act out their aggression. And this is one of those areas, the Wild Wild West. Arizona has open carry laws. In other words, you can carry your gun on your hip. Yeah, you don't have to conceal your weapon in the state, and it's been that way for over 20 years. As strange as that may seem. Now that may seem okay to you since you guys live here, but to somebody who's lived in states where they don't do that, it's really unnerving to go into a store and see some yahoo with a gun on their hip, thinking, this asshole decides he wants to blow the place apart. He certainly can, but he doesn't usually, but he can. But so it's unnerving to those of us who are from other places. It's unnerving to military personnel because we know how dangerous those weapons are. I hope we do anyway. Southerners tend to advocate violence and corporal punishment. Murder rates are 4 times that of the average northern city, and spanking is more prevalent in the South. 18% of non-whites and 36% of white Southerners believe that a man has a right to kill to protect his home, and are twice as likely to own a gun as Midwesterners. So now we're talking about guns and gun violence. Researchers have discovered that pain induces both humans and other species to strike out at the closest target. I had the nicest dog in the whole wide world, loved me, never even pretended to want to bite anybody. We picked up another dog, and I can't remember why we picked that dog up. But anyway, we were traveling across country, and this guy had a poodle, and he wanted his poodle to play with our dogs. And the dog that we picked up wanted to fight that other dog. They were all males. So he's growling, and we're holding on to him, trying to keep him from attacking the poodle. And of course, the idiot guy that had the poodle was just standing there. He didn't try to get away. He didn't recognize the fact that the growling and the teeth baring meant fight. He didn't recognize that. Well, so I had 2 dogs. I had both dogs. My wife had the little dog, and she could barely control it. And I had the big Doberman. And as the dogs got closer and closer together, my Doberman started barking at his dog, at our other dog, and the little dog started to attack the big dog, and the big dog bit me on the back of the leg. This is a dog that had never bitten anybody in his whole life. Why? Because pain induces other species to strike out, and that's exactly what happened. He was angry, and he got his dander up, and he decided he had to bite something, and my leg was the closest thing. I still have the scar on the back of my leg from his bite. It was a Doberman, okay? He's a big dog. Leonard Berkowitz has found that aversive stimulation from pain to irritating conditions, uncomfortable noise or temperature can trigger hostile aggression. So the hotter it is, the more noise that you can't control, the more likely that you're going to be aggressive. Yeah, so if you're in a situation, you're in a crowded amphitheater, it's before a concert. People are kind of pushing and shoving each other around. They're walking into each other and giving each other ugly faces. Why? Because of the noise. It's because of the heat. It's because of being overcrowded. This aversive stimulation can even take the form of dashed expectations and personal insults. And of course, at that stage, yes, ma'am.
Remember the Vegas shooting? I kind of assumed that was what happened to that. What was his name? That guy from the Vegas shooting?
Oh, Pollard?
Yeah.
Stephen Pollard.
Yeah.
You think that's what happened?
Yeah, well, I just
too
kind of
crowded.
assumed, like, maybe something triggered him.
Yeah.
Like, being in a crowd, or...
But he wasn't in the crowd. He was way all by himself. And
I think before the incident, he was, like, at the casino. There was,
Something.
like, lights, and then, the sound, and...
Exactly.
That stuffiness, it might have just...
You may be correct. You may be correct. Something triggered this guy to mass all those weapons and all that ammunition and try to kill a whole concert full of people. And he wounded, what, 700? So, and he shot a lot of rounds. He's pulling off a lot of rounds. What an idiot. Researchers have long speculated that the warmer the temperature, the more aggressively people act. Drivers in Phoenix without air conditioners often react aggressively when they stop in traffic. Pitchers beam more batters during 90-degree weather than in weather below 80 degrees, though their control is comparable and in both temperature ranges. Riots in the United States during the 60s and 70s, and none of you are old enough to remember any of this, but I am, because I was involved in all these things. During the 60s and 70s tended to occur in hot weather as compared to cool weather. And this is what Newark looked like. As you can see, we got a really serious problem. It's hot. This is New Jersey, and it's humid as hell. And it's really, really hot. And you can see these guys are dressed for the weather, but he's not. So what's the probability that this is going to erupt in violence? And actually it did. This is July 12, 1967. What's the probability this guy's going to start pulling off a couple of rounds? And of course, that was the biggest problem. He's all dressed up for, winter warfare, and they're in the middle of 90-degree heat with 90% humidity. So there was a lot of anger that took place. And eventually what happened was, this was during the daytime. That night, National Guard started shooting people. And over 100 people were killed in Newark, as ugly as that is. When people are attacked or insulted, they are more likely to respond with aggression. Crowding is a feeling that there is too little space per person. Around here, of course, it's not crowded at all. I'm looking outside and I can see probably a mile in every direction. I don't see any people at all. I don't see anybody. Oh, there's one. No, that was a bird. My mistake. It was a crow. It was black, so I assumed it was somebody from here. You guys wear black clothes. Gray, well, dark blue. Oh, there you go. See, that's a lighter color than the black. I guess we're not in Chinle.
Well, we're in like a dark blue.
Oh, that's close enough. Okay. Well, you're acceptable. People in densely crowded cities report feeling more fearful than people in less crowded areas. Even when the city has a lower crime rate, people still feel more uncomfortable on the streets. So if you've been to, where did you, Las Vegas? That's where you went to Las Vegas. Pretty damn crowded, wasn't it?
It's like you can't even.
Exactly. Don't stick your hand out, you hit somebody. And you might hit them in the wrong place and then they get upset.
Or they're all drunk or under the influence and you just don't want to piss someone off.
You don't want to, yeah, exactly.
Or get someone angry.
Exactly. I have to fly tomorrow. No, I fly on Friday. So.
You're going back Friday?
I'm going to, where am I going? My son graduates from college. Yeah, on Saturday. So I'm going to Florida. Oh, good, I get to fly to Florida. And of course, it's Fort Myers, which isn't one of the larger cities in Florida, but it's still crowded as hell. Just so crowded.
Even airports alone are crowded.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I will smile and I will say hello to people in the airport and nobody will say anything back to me. And that's okay. I'm used to it. You guys never say hi to me either. Oh, sometimes I'll be walking down the sidewalk and somebody will say hello to me, but usually people just kind of pretend that they're listening to their earbuds and they can't see me. Evidently there's something wrong. Or on their cell phones. They'll be looking up and all of a sudden they have to look at their cell phone so that they don't have to pay any attention to me. You know? I figure it's you guys. It doesn't have anything to do with me. You guys just don't like bellicons. Arousal. Researchers have discovered that aroused states, despite the cause of the arousal, will lead to a more aroused state if an emotional cue is introduced. Therefore, anger can lead to sexual passion as can fear. If you've ever been in a situation like that, you know that the emotions, you have one emotion, all of a sudden another emotion pops up. People are more likely to react with extreme emotions after being stimulated with bright lights or loud noises. like a rock concert. It's Las Vegas. Everybody's walking around the street, just all keyed up because of all the neon lights and all the noise and all the music just blaring at you in Las Vegas. Everybody's all ready to do something. And usually that is gamble. That's what they want to do. They want to gamble. Research by Leonard Berkowitz, and this is what Leonard Berkowitz looks like, has shown that select items can be used to as cues to aggression. So we use certain things to cue aggression. Berkowitz, in his research, used a gun to trigger more violent behavior. So he was trying to get people to be more aggressive, and he was able to do it by having them hold something that looked like a gun or felt like a gun. And when he did that, they were actually more aggressive. All it had to do was look like a gun or feel like a gun, and they became more aggressive. Anderson found that guns prime hostile thoughts and punitive judgments. So if you carry a gun around, you're going to be grouchy. If you carry a gun around, you're more likely to be violent, just because of the gun. That's confusing. I guess that's not that confusing. Over half of all murders in the United States were committed with handguns. I'm glad Emery's not here. He would argue with me. A handgun in the home is more likely to kill household members than intruders. The owners are 2.7 times more likely to be shot. Sometimes they commit suicide. Not as easy to commit suicide with something else. Real easy to commit suicide. Real easy to commit suicide with a gun. You got here just in time. The United States has 4 times the population of Great Britain, but 16 times the murders in the United States. The United States has 10,000 handgun killings a year, while Australia has 12, where they control their weaponry, and Canada, they only had 100, and they control their guns as well. We have a lot more violence in the United States. See, you missed it. Now we're going to talk about pornography.
Yeah, but nobody wants to ban the pistol that what you're talking about. Everybody wants to ban the assault rifle.
They do. They want to ban the assault rifle because...
If you look at how many murders are committed or suicides committed by assault rifles, it's...
Oh, nobody commits suicide with an assault rifle. Jeez, you blow your...
But that's the one everybody wants to ban.
Yeah, well, sure. It's because they use it in mass killings.
If you look at how many people died from texting and driving versus people who died from AR-15s, it's lopsided.
Oh, sure. Of course.
Cell phones kill more people.
Of course.
But nobody wants to ban the cell phone.
Of course not. Why would we ban cell
More
phones?
murders are committed by vehicles.
We'd have to look at all the cell phones that are out.
Vehicular homicide has more victims than assault rifles, but nobody wants to ban vehicles. It's fear.
I don't want my neighbor to have a gun.
More people die from McDonald's every year.
Oh,
than assault
please.
rifles. More people die from falling downstairs.
I only want soldiers to have guns, not to have assault rifles, not my neighbor, not my jackass neighbor who has no common sense, and he doesn't really need that weapon.
I will say that you changed my mind on one thing. I wanted no infringement on the Second Amendment. I've come to amend that position that not everybody deserves a weapon.
That's for damn sure.
So
Yeah. And we both know who those people are, don't we? I'll let you have a gun, and I can have a gun. I don't want one.
Isn't there a saying where it says, guns don't kill people, people kill people?
Sure. I don't know that makes any sense, but yeah, you can say that if you like. There's no logic to it, but we can say that, I guess. Well, let's talk about something more fun. Instead of shooting people, let's strangle people to death while we're raping them. Pornography and sexual violence. Researchers have found that violent pornography tends to give men a skewed idea of sexual response and tends to distort an individual's perception of how women actually respond to sexual coercion. Hopefully you've never seen any pornography, but if you have, potentially you've seen, what you've seen is women being physically induced to to have sex with the male. And sometimes it's relatively violent. There are a lot of very, very violent films out there. Research shows that men who view erotic films have decreased attraction for their partner, have increased acceptance of extramarital sex, and have an increased perception of women in sexual terms. In other words, they think of women in sexual terms. Something just happened yesterday. I'm going to show you in just a second. There was two fraternities in Pennsylvania had to shut down because of sexual violence. We'll get into it in a second. Well, storylines from Gone with the Wind and Down with Love purport that women often say no when they really mean yes. I don't know what's wrong with you guys, you females. Why the hell do you say no when you really mean yes? Don't you know the meaning of no and yes, yes and no? And the answer is yeah, you guys know what yes and no means. It's men that don't know the meaning of yes and no. Damn it. Pornography takes romance and usually foreplay out of the equation and leaves only the sexual overpowering male overwhelming the resistance of the impassioned female. And of course, that's what we saw in Gone with the Wind. That's what we saw in Down with Love. She kept saying no, but she really wanted him to seduce her. I know. How stupid was she? She thought no meant yes. Or, I don't know. And he recognized that yes really meant. If you've ever seen any of the early James Bond movies, he's always pulling women into closets and whatnot. A lot of sexual coercion there. They're saying no and he's having sex with them anyway.
Do you think the exposure to pornography is not just a blanket exposure, but maybe when you're exposed, if people are exposed at a young age versus older, or do you think it's just a blanket?
We don't know. We don't know at this point because we've never seen this before. I mean, pornography wasn't this available. When I was a kid, of course, pornography wasn't hardly available at all. So all we can do is look at longitudinal studies dealing with this. So men my age who were exposed to pornography probably in their pubescent period, when they were 17, 18, 19 years old. We can't, and they were different. I mean, it was different. Now it's videos. All that we could see were, girly magazines. And it was mostly softcore porn. Well, we're dealing with hardcore porn now. We're dealing with a lot of violence, and we have never seen this before. So that's an excellent question, but it's one that I can't answer, and one that we won't be able to answer until 2030. Because at that point, the kids today will be old enough, and we will get to see how they react to it. So that's an excellent question. Unfortunately, we don't have an answer yet, but we will get one, unfortunately, and it may be a really, really ugly answer because we don't know. If you think about what was the first time you saw pornography, and what type of pornography was it? At your advanced age. I'm kidding. You're not.
Oh no, I don't know because HBO used to show like really heated scenes, and I don't know if that's considered pornography.
I don't know. Would you have you've seen you're in the military, so I know you've seen more violent pornography than you saw on HBO. That's fairly soft. Softcore. That's fairly softcore compared to what some of the guys that.
Well, I mean, you get to a certain point, and it's. It doesn't matter. I think it becomes
commonplace.
I mean, you get like some sexual innuendo in movies,
right?
Then you get some that's overt,
right?
And then some that and then it kind of gradually goes up, and then you can scale into softcore and hardcore pornography.
Right. Exactly.
But I think, to me, I think it's not so much the pornography, but that point, it reaches a tipping point for someone where they become aroused.
Exactly.
I think that's what the exposure, I think, that
exactly
gets people, that affects people, I think.
Yeah. Right now we're talking about hardcore and softcore porn. In the future, it's going to be graded. like 1 degree porn, 2 degree porn, all the way up to 10 degree porn, as far as violent behavior and sexual content is concerned. You know, the stuff that we're going to see in the future, we have no idea. We can't even contemplate what's going to happen in the future. It's beyond our comprehension. If you look at pornography from the turn of the 20th century, it was French postcards, women displaying, you know, their sexual parts. That was it. I mean, there was no physical contact taking place. That was the essence of pornography. So if we read about what Freud thought about pornography, or what Rogers thought about pornography in the 50s, it doesn't have anything to do with today. Just like what I saw when I was in the 50s, what I saw doesn't have anything to do with what you can see today. So things are going to change. Everything's going to change. Everything's going to get worse or better. I don't know how you like to look at these things, but everything's going to change, and you guys are going to have to deal with this. You're the ones that are going to have to decide how bad this stuff is.
I think, like, kind of a side issue from pornography, but along the same lines of people who killed other people, murderers. I think they were a lot older before. And I think probably from the
In their 20s and 30s.
80s on, they started to become adolescent.
Exactly.
Younger people started to murder
Why?
people. And I was just thinking about that, like the correlation to like violence.
This has to do with your guns again.
The violence in movies and media and
Could be.
music and stuff like that. So
Sure.
maybe the same thing's going to happen with pornography.
It could happen, and that's why I tell you guys, you're the ones that are going to have to recognize this. You're the ones that are going to have to tell the DSM-6 that this is a really serious problem that we need to deal with. Not me. They're not going to listen to me. You guys are going to be the psychologists, and you need to tell them what's going on here on this reservation, and say this is a problem, and this is a problem that we see in Indian country, or just on the Navajo reservation or whatever. But kids started having more access to weaponry in the 80s and 90s. All of a sudden, I mean, before people had hunting rifles, and that was about it. All of a sudden, geez, we got those jackasses coming back from Vietnam, and they want to be armed with AK-47s and AR-15s. My brother came back from Vietnam and he bought M1 rifles. So he's got an M1 carbine and an M1 Garand rifle. He carries it around the property. And if any hunter comes around, he pulls out his weapon and he tells them to go away because there's no hunting on my property. You know, it's that kind of stuff.
Isn't porn looked at as art too?
Sure.
Like how them people make naked statues?
Sure. Sure. And that's the problem. The problem is we can't control it. I mean, there is no control for it because it can be called art and it can be called a First Amendment right. So there's nothing we can do with it. And I'm not saying that we should do anything with it. What I'm saying is it's getting more and more violent and well, it's just changing. Yes.
What parts of the brain get stimulated when people, men or women, look at?
Same as with crystal meth. Shit, I've been getting calls from. Hello?
I think it's the front part of the brain.
The front part?
Yeah, the front part. Then
Yeah.
also,
Why today? I don't understand.
because
What was that, satisfaction?
thalamus.
Yeah, it's a dopamine.
Dopamine.
Yeah, it's the dopamine
Yeah.
loop. It's
Yeah.
the same loop.
It's like
that-
chemical reaction.
Exactly.
Is that why
Without-
people get addicted to pornography?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
People who have that addiction, is it that DRD2?
DRD2A1.
Yes, I got it.
Yeah, DRD2A1.
I
Got
memorized
addiction.
it. No, I was trying to memorize that DRD2.
A1.
Yeah,
DRD2A1, yeah, there you
Yeah.
go, okay. When men watch violent films, it tends to desensitize them to depictions of violence and rape, and of course, well, I don't know. It all depends on what you're watching as to how desensitized you are. If you watch The Avengers, of course, that has nothing to do with reality. People are flying around. The Hulk is stomping around. I don't know. I haven't seen the movie, so I don't know what's going on. You know, Captain America throws his shield. Like I carry a shield wherever I go, so I can throw it or not. Anyway, Superman's flying around. Studies show that they become unsympathetic to victims of domestic violence, and the rate of injuries to victims are less severe. They see it as less severe. Correlational studies of the increase of pornography and rape cases show that as access to pornography increased, the number of rape cases increased. Those are correlational studies. Does one thing have anything to do with the other? Well, potentially it does, and this is one of the things that we need to think about. However, the connection between violent sex and crimes and pornography may not directly be drawn. A lot of people watch pornography, and most people aren't violent as far as their sexual ideas are. While rapists, child molesters, and serial killers tend to use more pornography than non-offenders, the pornography may be more of a symptom than a cause of their deviance. So if we were going to profile somebody who was a rapist, we would probably talk about their pornography addiction or the idea that they looked at pornography. But just because you look at pornography doesn't make you a rapist. Certainly not. So the reality is that if we were looking for a rapist on this campus, we could look at the type of pornography that everybody looks at, and we could probably determine who that person was. And he would probably be the guy with the most violent pornography. But he wouldn't have to be. He could be a very low-key individual who is triggered. Less violent pornography triggers him to act. It all depends on the individual. I know. So this is weird. I mean, we could look at people's the pornography that they look at and try to determine what kind of violent behavior that might potentially trigger. But it's not a direct correlation. We can't do that. We can't say, oh, geez, he looks at this really horrible pornography. There must be something wrong with him. Therefore, he must be the rapist. But he may be, the librarian. Oh, wait a minute, that's Herman, isn't it? Sorry, Herman's my back door neighbor. Him and that damn dog of his. Oh, that dog was howling all night long. Started about 11 o'clock, and I went to bed at 1, and geez, that dog was still howling. He's a hound dog. Oh, she's all night.
Do you think pornography affects men and women differently, or do you think it's the same thing?
Yeah, well, if we look at the percentage of men that view pornography, it's in the 90% range. If we look at women, it's only in the 60% range. Women look at romantic circumstances, and men look at sexual circumstances where the sex act is actually taking place. Women are more likely to watch pornography, look at pornography where somebody is being seduced. It's the seduction it's the foreplay that they enjoy watching. The men are looking for the sex act. Women are more looking for the foreplay. So they have different tastes in pornography. But of course, there are no absolutes. This is just a generalization. There are some women, of course, some women are lesbians. Some men are gay. And I'm not exactly sure why, but I've never looked at any gay pornography. Why? I did see that stuff that they had up at Fort Belknap, but it's not. It's sometimes I will look at pornography sites just to see what people are looking at. A lot of times I'm just looking at the titles to see what the hell are people responding to, and it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. I mean, even the trigger words, the words that they're looking for to find their pornography has changed. It's become more violent.
Is there research done on it?
There isn't, and one of the reasons is because if I did the research, people would think there was something wrong with me. If a woman did the research, Yeah, she might be, would probably be a feminist, and she would probably see it all as negative. So it's really hard to do research in this area. I know. Whoever does the research is going to be denigrated by everybody. Everybody's going to hate this guy or this young lady, whoever they may happen to be. I have an article. Do you have?
There's actually some on that article, psych article.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Look for pornography and see how much we have.
Don't catch a
We'll get a virus.
like an online STD.
Chill. That's so nasty. Stop.
This is an article of the last issue of Sports Illustrated, came out last Friday, or I got it on
That's
Friday.
sick.
So this is current.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Why do you think it's hard for people to talk about things of a sexual nature? Why do you think it's embarrassing? You think
Well,
that's
we're
because-
Americans, and Americans are far more sexually repressed than other people are. If we went to Germany, of course, they could have these conversations. It's a taboo in this culture, but it's also taboo in the American culture to talk about sex in an open manner. I'm going to teach human sexuality next year, hopefully, kinda, maybe, unless something happens. It's been a fight just to offer that class. I was teaching at Mississippi University for women. It took them 11 years to approve the human sexuality course. And it's required by the education department in Mississippi, but it took them 11 years to get their human sexuality course approved. So it's the same reason as why Navajos don't want to talk about this stuff. Like why this is a taboo subject. It's a taboo subject with a lot of people. It's not so much on other reservations, like.
Oh, that was gonna be my next question.
Yeah, it's not. No, other Indian tribes, especially the Plains tribes, they're relatively open about it. Well, I told you about the Hickeys. That's just funny. But they're a lot more open about this stuff. And it's the grandparents that teach their grandchildren about sex. And because of that, it's, and they're elders. And they respect their elders. And so it's a lot more acceptable behavior. Or it's a lot more acceptable subject as far as they're concerned. And they're a lot more realistic about it. If I wanted to teach human sexuality up in Montana, or North Dakota or South Dakota, there wouldn't even have been a question. And here, geez, I just about got raked over the coals just because I mentioned it in class one day. Select individuals. Yeah, the other tribes are different. And I just know about the mountain tribes of the Northwest and the Northern Plains tribes, but they're a lot more open about this stuff. They're more realistic about it. But then again, Freud talked about sexual repression, but he was living in a sexually repressed society. Now, the bizarre part was that this is Victorian Europe, and the non-Jewish population was very repressed, but the Jewish population wasn't nearly as repressed as the Christian population. But it really all depends on how you see these things. Oh, jeez. I know, it's a terrible subject, isn't it?
I was just trying to think about our culture here in the reservation as compared to like American culture and different cultures around the world, but not even just of this time frame. But like, if you go back to Greece, back in their heyday, they were very open.
Yeah, they're very open about sex, and it was almost all bisexual.
Yeah, I was just gonna say homosexuality wasn't considered taboo or anything.
Right, but it was mostly bisexual sex. A male would marry somebody, and that would be his wife, and then he would find a boyfriend, usually a much younger individual, to also have sex with. It was very common. Not only that, but they had statues of penises, as odd as that may seem, and it was a fertility symbol. The erect penis was a fertility symbol. And of course, Victorian Europe didn't want to admit any of this stuff. You know, the Romans made statues of naked men and naked women, and the Victorians covered them up, covered up all their sexual parts, covered up their penises, covered up their vaginas, covered with fig leaves, as bizarre as it may seem. But you know, it's just different cultures are different. And that's what happened in Hawaii when the damn did I say damn? I didn't mean damn. When the Christians went in, and the missionaries went to Hawaii, they made all the people were running around naked, because if you've ever been there, it's warm and you don't need clothes. And they were running around without clothes, and they thought it was so obscene that they made them put clothes on. And if you go to Hawaii today, unless you go to a strip joint, you can't see anybody without any clothes on, which is, you know, that's good, because we don't want to see anybody's dirty parts. Anyway, but when they first got there, they weren't wearing any clothes at all. None whatsoever. They not only weren't covering their breasts, but they weren't covering their sexual parts either. Their reproductive parts.
Where was this at?
Hawaii.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was Presbyterians that went in there, and they were so shocked. You know, those Scottish Presbyterians.
Do you think pornography is a reflection then of sexual
Repression.
repression?
Yes. Yeah, it's a good point. That's an excellent point.
Wait, what did you say again?
It's-
Pornography is I don't know, what did I say?
Reflection of
Re-
sexual
Oh, yeah,
repression.
Sexual repression. Right. So if we were,
Resistance, I guess?
yeah, if we were more open about sex, then we wouldn't need the same pornography. We wouldn't be viewing the same pornography. It gets more obvious the more sexually repressed you are. The more sexually repressed you are, the stronger your desire to look at things that you're not supposed to look at. We're like teenagers. You tell them not to drink, so that weekend they go out and get drunk. You know, we're the same way. All humans are the same way. It's exciting, isn't it? Now there are problems with pornography, of course. Interviews with serial rapist Ted Bundy related that he used sexually violent pornography to prime himself for rapes and murders that followed. That was Ted Bundy. How many Ted Bundys are there out there? Probably maybe a handful. But the rest of us, if we are looking at this type of pornography, it wouldn't trigger us to murder anybody. But he used it to murder. It is estimated that 28% of the women in the United States have experienced a sexual coercive episode that would fit the criteria for rape, 28%, a little bit over 1/4. Most didn't label the episode rape because it didn't involve violence or a stranger. It was somebody they knew. It was Cousin Bill, or it was Uncle Jimmy. It was somebody that they knew. Rape statistics in Canada show 23% of the women have been raped. In Germany, it's 17%, New Zealand, 25%, the United Kingdom, 19%, and in South Korea, it is 22%. Something really weird, I just saw this statistic a couple weeks ago. They were talking about Japan, and they were talking about the percentage of 30-year-olds who have never had sex. In other words, the percentage of individuals that are virgins. In the United States, the figure is somewhere between 1 and 5%. Between 1 and 5% of 30-year-olds are still virgin in the United States. In Japan, it's over 25%. Different culture, different way of looking at things. Now, if you look at the cartoons that come out that the people are looking at in Japan, they're very erotic. They're relatively pornographic. You might find them extremely pornographic because they're so explicit. Now, the bizarre part is that most of their cartoon characters are not Japanese. Most of their cartoon characters are Western people. The males are Japanese, but the females are Western women. Japanese women are relatively demure, they're relatively tiny individuals, they have little bitty tiny mouths. And if you look at the cartoons coming out of Japan, they don't have mouths at all. They have just a blank spot where the mouth is, as strange as that may seem. But most of the pornography has to do with Western women being raped. But the Japanese have a rape culture.
Do the British have a really sexually repressive culture?
They do, but it has gotten, during the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, the British newspapers would have naked women on page 2. It's never on page 1, of course. You don't want the headline to be somebody's breasts. And the British are really focused on female breasts. They're just gaga over breasts. So if you watch a British movie, a lot of times you see a lot of cleavage. You probably won't see a lot of naked breasts, but you will see a lot of women with relatively large breasts. It's just the way that the English are. Different culture, different way of looking at things. Now, if you go to Germany, the Germans are fairly large people and relatively large-chested people. Their women are relatively large-chested, but it's not a thing for them. They don't even look at that, as strange as that may seem. But the English are a little bit more sexually repressed. Different cultures, different ideas. Can we accept that? Different cultures, different ideas. You were in Iraq where everybody was all covered up all the time. You had no idea what the woman looked like under her tent, under her burqa, right? Yeah. Which drove some American guys crazy. That one guy that was in Iraq, where he kidnapped a 15-year-old girl and murdered her family, and then raped the girl and then murdered her. They tried to burn her. That was about, 10 years ago or so. Green was the guy's name. As stupid as that sounds. And he got his whole squad to help him. They cordoned off the house. And, there were only 2 men that raped the girl. Of course, they could figure it out afterwards. They weren't able to burn her entire body. But there was almost two types of groups in Iraq. It didn't matter what service you belonged to. You fell into one or two groups. People who were going out on patrols every day, and people who were stuck on the base. Right. And he was security.
So he was probably stuck on the base.
He was stuck on the base, and they manned a checkpoint where the Iraqis had to come through. And they weren't allowed to touch the women. And he saw this girl. Of course, she was only 15, so she wasn't married. So she wasn't covered. And he got a yin for her and decided that he found out where she lived. She didn't live very far away from the checkpoint. And one night they went out and murdered the family and raped and murdered the girl. As weird as that is.
Huh.
I know. Different culture.
I guess that would kind of be, if you're stuck on the base, it really restrictive on your access to the outside world.
Right.
I guess that would be considered a very sexually repressive, because again, everybody's covered up and there's real strict rules against fragmentation, even though it occurs. But then people going outside the wire, sex is like probably towards the bottom of your list. You just worry about not dying.
You're getting potentially you're being attacked every time you go out. Yeah, so you look at the world differently. Did they send you guys to Bahrain or?
No, I was in Baghdad. We operated in Baghdad, Fallujah, and Ramadi.
Right, but did they send you someplace for R&R for a couple of weeks?
Oh, right there in Baghdad.
Oh, you stayed in Baghdad.
I got 4 days off.
Oh, 4 days off. Okay. Sometimes they sent people. Well, I guess it all depends.
Oh, they sent people sometimes to Kuwait.
Yeah.
And down to Dubai.
And there were prostitutes.
Probably.
Yeah.
I
You didn't get to
wasn't
go.
so lucky.
Yeah, you weren't so lucky. Okay.
To leave Baghdad. I wasn't lucky enough to leave Baghdad.
Oh, shoot. It is estimated that 75% of stranger rapes are nearly all acquaintance rapes, and nearly all acquaintance rapes go unreported. Most people don't tell anybody about it. Surveys of college-age males, this is a shocking statistic. Surveys of college-age males shows that a full 33% would consider sexual assault if they could be assured that they would never be discovered. In other words, they would rape 1 out of every 3 college males would rape somebody if they knew that they would never be discovered. 1 out of every 3. So the rape culture exists, unfortunately. And let me show you, if I can. This just happened yesterday. This just happened yesterday. If I can find it. So this stuff is going on. Come on. Okay. Let me show you. This is CNN. Especially for a Fox News person. There it is. It was on the front page. There it is, right there. This is in Pennsylvania. 2 Swarthmore fraternities will disband after documents reveal references to rape addicts and racist behavior.
In the last 7 years, there are more than 24 students who have died because of hazing at U.S. colleges and universities.
That's not even talking about that. That's okay. Yeah, so that's what's going on. Swarthmore is a fairly prestigious institution in Pennsylvania. They had to close down these fraternities because they have rape addicts. What does that mean? That means that they have a place where they take their girlfriends and she either has sex with them willingly or unwillingly. And they call them rape addicts. Addicts, A-T-T-I-C-S, not A-D-D-I-C-T-S. Okay. Anyway, this happened yesterday. This was just disclosed yesterday about these rape addicts, these fraternities, these male bastions, where these select individuals have this really strange idea about sexual response and what women are supposed to do. As stupid as that all sounds. Well, the military has a very similar culture. There are individuals in the military with a very similar culture, or maybe it's changed since I was in the service. You certainly have a lot more women in the service than when I was in the service. When my wife was first enlisted back in '78, she was walking around Lackland. Lackland, of course, is the basic training base for the Air Force. And she was in her uniform. She was a second lieutenant. And she's walking around, and these 2 nose stripers started harassing her. My wife is I've already told you, she's a full-figured woman. And they started, she's a lieutenant. These 2 individuals had of course, had just joined the Air Force. And she had to call the cops on them. She called the SPs, and they arrested her for sexual harassment. They were in basic training. I don't know if they allowed them to stay in the service or not, but here they thought that it was okay. A woman's a target and can be targeted. When we were in basic training, I don't know about the Army or the Marines, but when in the Air Force, the basic training for the females was on one side of the base, and basic training for the males was on the other side of the base. They didn't want them to get anywhere close to each other because they were afraid that rape would occur, or seduction would occur, or whatever. And of course, this is a continuing problem in the military, and it was worse in the past because there were fewer females. And of course, if they joined the military, it was kind of all bets are off. But at this point, of course, there's a lot more women in the military. So things have changed a little bit. But she was sexually harassed on base, and she was an officer, and they were enlisted, and that's fraternization, of course, for one thing. But it was insulting. It scared her a little bit. She was afraid to walk on base alone. So after that, she never did walk alone. She always was chaperoned by somebody else, by another female or by a male, in order to get around on base. And the worst thing, well, we won't go into that. We won't go into the colonel that tried to tried to talk her into having an affair. I was mad. I didn't find out until years later, but I was ready to kill, of course. I mean, it's logical. She's my wife. Anyway, ugly stuff. Men who are the most likely to rape are sexually coercive. They have their dominance is demonstrated in their aggression. They're hostile toward women, and they're sexually promiscuous. This sounds like military personnel. We had an individual, he was Major Mad Dog. Mad Dog Wilson was his name. And he bragged that he had sex every day of his life, or every day of his adult life. And you'd go, wait a minute, Mad Dog, you've got 4 kids, and sometimes you go on overnights to Las Vegas or out to California, and you were stationed overseas for a year. And he brags about the fact that he had sex with women that were not his wife. Well, this is kind of a mindset with some military personnel, of course. Certainly not all military personnel. Otherwise,
Do you know if rape among active duty soldiers is higher than the general population?
yeah.
It is?
Oh, it's much higher. Oh, sure.
I've just been thinking about this since we've been talking about it, and I was trying to reflect back on my time on active duty. And there was,
Just think about what the guys were saying.
compared to general population of the same age group, my observations, just to reflect on it, I know there was a lot more pornography.
Yeah, oh yeah.
People would share pornography, and, it was, people openly talked about masturbation, openly talked about sexual encounters from the weekend.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was a lot more sexually charged.
A lot more testosterone.
Yeah, and if you talk to people in the general population, they have these same conversations, but it's not to the same degree.
No.
It's a lot less,
Right.
and they keep a lot of it to themselves.
Yeah.
But it's still there, but it's not as, it's just open.
It's like 2 bulls butting heads. I mean, their testosterone is flaring, and when they share, when they talk about masturbation, or they talk about their sexual encounters, or they share their pornography, their testosterone is raised, is peaking. So it's like 2 bulls butting heads.
There was kind of like almost unspoken rule around barracks too. Don't bring your wife or your girlfriend to
Oh, yeah.
barracks. I remember one time my girlfriend wanted to see where I lived, and I said, "Oh hell no, I'm never taking you to my barracks." I knew what was there.
Yeah, you may not get out of there intact, of course. Ugly stuff. I can remember when I first went into service, this was in '71, and this, of course, was during Vietnam, but they would allow us to have pictures of naked women as long as they didn't have their legs spread out. What does that mean? Well, they didn't want to see the vagina.
I was just thinking too, the connection between pornography and viewing women as an object,
Right,
objectifying women rather than empathizing with them and seeing them as a person.
exactly.
And then that even goes into the culture that we're kind of coming out of, where men felt like it was okay to slap a woman on the ass or on the butt, or
Sure.
be a little overly reference sex a little
Exactly.
over, and I think we're kind of coming out of that now. But women weren't expected to be able to object to that.
Exactly. Things changed. Things changed from 1970s, the 1980s, 1990s, and now we're in the 2000s, and we're in the Me Too movement in the United States. So things have changed. If they talk about Joe Biden slapping somebody on the butt, that may have been in the 1990s where it was acceptable behavior. But of course, it's still a negative behavior that he probably shouldn't have done. I mean, people are ignoring the fact that Donald Trump had 2 affairs that are fairly obvious. The women admit that he had affairs with them, but that was acceptable behavior back, 10 years ago. It's not now, but it was 10 years ago.
When I became an NCO and I had soldiers under my charge, that's where I really realized how big the problem was, because now I had to corral people's behaviors. And when we would go and work around other units, because I was the infantry, so it's all men.
Sure.
when we'd work with other units that had females in it, I had to really keep an eye on my soldiers to make sure that they were behaving themselves. And I had a talk one time with one of the truck drivers. She was a truck driver. And I just asked her, I said, just be careful. I said, I know you like to joke with everybody, but I said, if my guys see one green light, they're going to think the light's green.
Right.
Just, I asked her to watch over her soldiers, and keep some
Right.
professionalism.
Right.
I said, I know we all like to joke. I said, just be careful.
Right.
I said, if you have any problems, let me know. But we were having this conversation, and I asked her about how she dealt with it. And she said, well, I want to get promoted, so I don't want to cause any
Exactly.
waves. So I could try to keep a lot of that to myself. She's like, well, I've had to deal with unwanted
Sexual
gross
advances.
jokes and
Exactly.
sexual innuendo, and
Sure.
I guess I kind of, it's kind of weird, like you don't you think about it until later, and put myself in that position. What if the roles were reversed?
Well, think about Mose, and Moses had this conversation, with me anyway.
Yeah.
She's talked about how her friends protected her from that. But they joked about these kinds of things. But she knew that they were just joking, that it was just words, and there weren't any actions behind it. But there were actions behind other individuals.
I just know I wouldn't want my daughter to join the military.
Well, that's a good point. I was going to say, if somebody had daughters, you certainly never brought up somebody's daughter. And if somebody tried to joke about somebody's sister, that became a fist fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly you never talked about anybody's mother, unless it was, well, you never talked about anybody's mother. Just bringing up somebody's sister would get everybody fighting, because then all of a sudden, all of these inappropriate ideas that they had, now all of a sudden it became, everybody's almost all females are somebody's sister. But if you even brought up the concept of sister, then that's somebody who's you can't touch, theoretically, that you can't touch. And these guys are talking about her as if they were going to rape her.
So is that why, like, pornography and drugs, they activate the same part of the brain, they activate the same way they remove that restriction?
The inhibitions are gone. Exactly. Now, strangely, well, we won't go into the sister pornography and the grandma pornography and the stepson pornography. But this is all relatively new. I mean, these are new things on the internet that we didn't see before. I mean, if you looked at pornography 10 or 15 years ago, there was no grandma porn, and now all of a sudden this is a big thing. And of course, child pornography is against the law. It's against international law, so you can't show that stuff. Okay, so we're talking about what triggers people, and one of the things that triggers people is television. Well, television has changed completely. Now you've got Netflix. Nobody watches television anymore, except I watch Big Bang on every Thursday night, and there's only 4 more new episodes. I don't know what I'm going to do after Big Bang is off the air. There are more televisions in the United States than there are bathtubs and telephones. Well, everybody's got a cell phone, but now your cell phone is a television set, as weird as that is. 2/3 of homes have 3 or more television sets. The television is on an average of 7 hours a day in most homes. Each member of the family watches an average of 4 hours of programming. Women watch more television than men. Non-whites watch more television than whites do. Preschoolers and retired people watch the most. Less educated watch more than highly educated people. Rules of thumb. 6 in 10 television shows contain violence. Fistfights were long drawn-out affairs, unlike reality, where injury usually limited the fight due to a broken jaw or a broken hand. If you punch somebody in the nose, they can't see. So this is a hint and a warning. Don't let anybody hit you in the nose. But if you are in a fight, if you hit them in the nose, they can't fight anymore because they can't see. That's usually the way it works. Fights only last for a couple punches. That's reality. But if you watch on television, these guys are just beating the crap out of each other for minutes. And of course, that's just not true at all. I used to work in the emergency room. We used to get guys that would come in with spiral fractures of their little finger. And that's because when they hit somebody, they thought they tried to catch them on this knuckle, but they caught him on this knuckle instead. And this is a very weak bone, so if you catch somebody off center, it's going to just spiral fracture this bone right here. And when you put a cast on them, you've got to stick these fingers out. This finger has to go straight out, and these have to be curled in. But you have to put a cast all the way down to here on that guy, and so he's walking around like this.
Don't they call that boxer's fracture?
The boxer's fracture. That's a spiral fracture of this metatarsal right here.
I got one of those.
It hurts.
Yeah, messes with your hand long term.
Well, yeah. Now all of a sudden you can't make a fist anymore. So not only does it break your hand right now, but it messes your hand up for the rest of your life. As stupid as that is. Oh, you too, huh? I was playing softball. I got a spiral fracture in one of my little fingers.
Yeah, I guess it would make sense with the television changing things because, like I was talking about, with violence increasing in younger and younger people. It was a point not too long back where people could fight it out, and then they were expected to shake hands after.
Right.
And then that was it. It was settled.
Yeah. But we don't do that anymore.
Nobody does that anymore.
Now we hate those people. We want them to die. 3/4 of the time the aggressors went unpunished. 58% of the time the victims were not shown to exhibit any pain. I don't know if you've ever been in a fight, but getting punched hurts usually, especially if you get hit someplace on your face. Only 5%. I remember watching a movie where the guy started spitting out his teeth. I don't know if you've ever lost a tooth in a fight. It is not the most pleasant thing in the world, especially if it broke off. Then you had it was open and you had a lot of problems. Only 5% of violence was shown to have long-term consequences. 2/3 depicted violence as funny, and we're not going to watch the monkeys, but they got into a fist fight. You can imagine monkeys from 1969 television show. The monkeys get in a fight. Yeah, everybody gets hit and they fall down. It's really not that easy to knock somebody out, but a lot of people can do it in one punch, evidently, because it happens on television like every other day. Children spend more time watching television than they spend in school. By junior high, the average child has observed 8,000 murders and 100,000 other violent acts. Some supporters of television violence and pornography as well report that TV violence acts as a cathartic release, actually reducing the amount of violence, but that's not true. The opposite is actually true. Research shows that television desensitizes people to violence. Television also does not represent a realistic world. It tends to have more male characters. There are 67% of the characters on television are male. In reality, only 51% of humans are male. Most people aren't married. There's only 10% of the people on television are married, whereas 61% of the population is actually married. Most aren't blue-collar workers. 25% on television are blue-collar workers, whereas 67% of the people in the United States are blue-collar workers. Most seem to have no religious affiliation. Only about 6% admit to a religious affiliation, whereas 88% of people claim religious affiliation. They consume more alcohol. 45% of the people on television consume alcohol, whereas 16% consume alcohol on a regular basis. Surveys of people who watch a great deal of television shows that they view the world as a more violent place than it actually is. They are more fearful of someone coming into their home and more fearful of going outside and being attacked. These individuals also are more likely to read aggression into others' behaviors and interpret words as aggressive rather than neutral. And this happened in the last election. They scared people, and the people that they scared were the people that watched select types of television. They watch television, cops, for example, where they're always finding bald-headed Hispanic gentlemen who are criminals or black people who are criminals. So these individuals are afraid of black people and bald-headed Hispanic individuals. Are they that dangerous? Are black people really as dangerous as they show on television?
Yeah.
You're just trying to get me to yell at you, aren't you?
I think it's more the poverty. It doesn't matter what race is. poverty that drives people into criminal life and violence.
Well, if you see a black guy, if you're walking down the street in Phoenix and you see a black guy, is he a good guy or a bad guy? Should you be afraid of him?
Yeah, he's stronger than you.
I think
He's stronger than you are?
I'm afraid of anybody downtown.
Really?
It doesn't matter if they're white, black, or brown.
Please.
I know the bad areas are bad areas.
Oh, please. I'm sure that you've been trained to take just about anybody.
I mean,
You're safe.
I'm aware of the threat. So it doesn't matter to me if I saw someone that was, the race wouldn't matter to me. I would just see the person as in the place I was in.
Anybody in this environment is going to be dangerous. Okay.
But you know, it was funny. A couple weeks ago, I was in Albuquerque, and I was walking by a store, and there was a couple, and I was in a good mood, and I smiled, and they looked at me, and they got scared. I could tell.
Oh.
The lady.
When Indians smile, it means they want to do something they shouldn't.
The man grabbed his wife and pulled him closer.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I know. And I walked past.
Was it a white couple?
Yeah, and an older white couple, and I thought, you know what? Do I look scary?
You know, I read your.
But I thought about that.
Yeah.
The question you just asked.
Yeah.
I wonder if I ever do that.
What, that you're afraid of people just because of who they are or what they look like?
Yeah.
Unless there's people that are around people that actually frighten them, aren't used to being around other races. Because some people...
So why would you assume another race is dangerous?
Television.
Instinct?
No.
Instinct thinking, like, you know, I've never seen this person, so I better be careful. Or they look at me, maybe they heard something about that race.
You saw it on television.
Yeah.
If you guys only trust other Navajos, then you're probably in trouble. Then don't ever go off the reservation.
I trust Navajos the least.
I was told not to trust Navajos. I was told not to pick up a hitchhiker. Don't pick up hitchhikers on the reservation.
I picked up a hitchhiker last week. I was so pissed off because I dropped him off. My son's tablet was gone. I was so pissed off. I just bought it for him. $400 down the drain. I was so pissed off. Then I got mad at myself. I was like, it's my own fault for picking up hitchhikers.
Now I'll never pick up a hitchhiker. Not here on the reservation, though, anyway. But up north, I used to pick up hitchhikers all the time. No problem. Even, we picked up one time that was Tweaky, and he's picking at himself. He's picking at his face, and we knew who he was, but we knew his mom and his dad, so.
I usually only stop like if it's if there's kids, I always stop.
If they're waving at 20?
Nah, I don't. Then they.
Yeah, like
If there's a child, I'll always stop. But this happened to have kids. There was two older guys and a little kid. And
Oh, that's good.
my tablet was gone. I was so pissed off.
I don't blame you one little bit. I would be pissed off too. Okay, what are we talking about? We're talking about group influences on aggression. Brian Mullen analyzed information from 60 lynchings that took place in the United States between 1899 and 1946. Almost all these were lynchings of African Americans, of course. They discovered the larger number of people that attended the lynching, the more vicious the murder and mutilation, and this is a form of de-individuation. The more people, whoops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to show you that. Similar behavior can be seen with youth gangs, soccer fans, especially in England, soldiers, urban rioters, and school children in Scandinavia. Now we think of Norway and Sweden and Finland and Denmark as some of the nicest, they are the happiest people in the world. And this is true. This strangely is true. But in Scandinavia, in Sweden and Norway and Denmark and Finland, they do what they call mobbing. If there is a weak child in a classroom, they will pick on that weak child. They'll beat them up, trying to make them stronger. As stupid as that sounds. and they call it mobbing. They harass them, they attack them, and it's because they're different. They're not the same as they are. So of course, mob rules, the mob mentality is true even in Scandinavia, among Scandinavian toddlers. Why Scandinavia? These are the Vikings? I don't know. Maybe that has something to do with it. They have this violent aspect. They have this violent past. So maybe that has something to do with mobbing. If you watch the movie How to Train Your Dragon with Hiccup, nobody watches that movie? My grandson loves that movie. They're training dragons. Anyway, Hiccup is picked on just like what was happening or what actually happens in Scandinavia. Soccer violence. Okay. The next chapter is about prejudice, and you wrote about what happened to you. I read that last night.
On Flagstaff?
Yeah, it just broke my heart. It just broke my heart. Because I'm thinking, what a bunch of jerks.
Flagstaff's a real racist place.
Yeah, and there are racist places around the United States. One of the most racist places is Havre, Montana. White people in Havre, Montana are just mean. They like Canadians, but they don't like the Indians. Well, strangely enough, there's a reservation on one side of Havre and there's a reservation on the other side. So, but they hate Indians, as stupid as that sounds, despite the fact that they make tons and tons of money off the American Indians. They invite the Canadians to come down from Canada and buy their stuff in the United States, but they don't invite the Indians. There are other groups that we're dealing with, but it seems like it's the border towns that are the worst. That's where we find the most prejudice. In Gallup, in Flagstaff, and I don't know about Phoenix.
There's actually some racist nowadays too. Don't like white people, black people.
You guys don't even like yourselves. You don't like each other.
I don't like people equally.
You don't like the wrong clan. I mean, I've seen.
Yeah, there you go.
I've seen this. There's 300,000 of you guys. So,
I
yeah.
just had a question about aggression. What are some theories based on aggression?
Oh, well, we saw them before. Maybe I just skipped over them. We have Dollard and Miller. We have the frustration aggression theory. And we have the learned social behavior theory.
Where does theory of mind play into that?
Theory of mind, well, I guess frustration aggression theory is a theory of mind. They are frustrated, therefore it makes them more aggressive.
Wouldn't that be like an adaptation to it?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, one of the reasons, a lot of people say that one of the reasons why American Indians were so aggressive after Europeans came here was because of the pressure. Everybody was moving west, and so tribes kept running into other tribes, and they had to become territorial because there's only a certain amount of food, a certain amount of game to be had. So they became more aggressive. So as the Europeans pushed the indigenous peoples west, people became more aggressive. And there's a theory out there that there was not that much conflict going on with indigenous peoples before the Europeans got here. But of course, there are other realities, and the other realities are that there was always conflict going on between one group and the other group for dominance and whatnot.
That was us, the Navajos, the Utes, Kiowa, Comanche.
Sure, the Comanches came out of the plains. They came out of the southern plains, yes, as soon as they came in contact with other individuals, they just went berserk and just kind of carved out a territory, Comancheria, carved out a territory in the middle of the United States. And everybody was afraid of them. The Spanish were afraid of them. Everybody was afraid of them. I mean, they were very violent people. But they were carving out their own territory. But they were being pushed from the north by all the northern tribes. You guys were stopping them from going too far west, so So they kind of dominated Oklahoma and Kansas and Colorado, eastern Colorado, northern New Mexico. So,
That makes sense. So I guess the thing is, it's just like, it becomes like very broad. I mean, if you look at people who suffer from like, say if it's because of, like if they're not taking their medication, that can cause aggression.
Sure.
Like, just certain things like that, how do you categorize those sort of different, I guess, types of aggression? Like substance abuse and alcohol aggression.
yeah, usually when you drink alcohol, it takes away your inhibitions. Usually your inhibitions is serotonin. You've got testosterone splashing through your system. Serotonin keeps you from being aggressive, overly aggressive. So when you take your you take your medication, it takes away your inhibitions. So it takes away this control that your serotonin has over you. So they may become more aggressive. It's it's just the problem is that we're mixing our natural emotions with a medication now, and all of a sudden, with different people, they'll have different reactions to the same medication. I can take the medication, I'm okay. Emery takes the medication, he's okay. You take the medication, and you go berserk.
So I guess like that whole process, what theory would that be under?
That's a biological theory, I guess, because we're talking about pharmaceuticals.
Okay.
Or the cognitive theory, because cognitive theory deals with neurotransmitters and all the mix of all these
That's
chemicals.
actually also related to addiction.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, is it time?
Yeah.
Okay. Last class, thank you very much. I had a great class. Thank you for all of your comments and whatnot. I hope you guys learned something and that you can take something away from the class.
Learned a lot.
I learned a lot. I had a lot of my own ideas challenged, especially by other people that said things and talked about things. They really challenged my own thinking, and so I think I'd say I learned a lot this semester.
You broke my heart last night when I read about prejudice, and we didn't cover prejudice, but please go ahead and take that test anyway. But that broke my heart. That broke
I
it.
thought we did.
We just kind of hit on it, but there's a whole chapter about prejudice. So you can look at chapter 13
So-
to get all the answers.
There's no final, right? It's just a
No, it's just online. Whatever's online.
that third one is the last one.
That third one's the last one.
So next week we don't got to worry about finding out when we.
No,
So this is it.
Yeah, just
you're good.
just do all
You guys
your
are good to go.
discussions, your
There you
tests.
go. And you've done all your discussions.
Research papers.
There's no exam?
No,
Okay, good.
no. There's a third exam on the internet. And once
Chapter
you take
9 through 13.
9 through
Just do all
13.
those things that
Oh,
are
okay.
needed
Yeah.
for online.
I got lost because I'm not sure about my other course, if it was like 1 through 12 that we did already in this class.